got a sandwich or something. Hi, everybody. I'm John Grogan, the Associate Publisher of Linux Journal and the publisher of the Geek Guides. I would like to thank you all for coming to our Linux Journal webinar today, Beyond Sudo, How to Know When You've Outgrown It and What to Do About It. We're very excited also to announce almost simultaneously our new latest installment in our Geek Guide series by the same name, Beyond Sudo, How to Know You've Outgrown It and What to Do About It, written by Greg Bledsoe and sponsored by the privileged access management experts at BeyondTrust. As you can see on the right side of the screen, we're trying to ascertain people's involvement in, and obviously of interest in, but your involvement in the security process. So we'll be taking a couple of polls. They're timed during the presentation today and would really appreciate your interaction and help. So if you just take a second to answer the questions when they pop up, we promise we won't overwhelm you with them, and it would really make our day. In addition, if you have any questions, we are live, so please post them in the Q&A box on the right side of your screen, and we will answer as many as time allows. Finally, there's also going to be a brief post-webinar survey at the end as you exit, and we'd really appreciate your participation and help with that as well. Our experts today are Paul Harper from BeyondTrust and Greg Bledsoe, Linux Journal's own Greg Bledsoe. Paul is one of BeyondTrust's Linux Unix experts. He's their product manager for Linux Unix solutions. Is deeply involved in the product strategy and the go-to-market strategy for PowerBroker and PowerBroker Identity Services, which are BeyondTrust products. And he has 20 years of experience in Linux and Unix operations and deployments. Greg, I think many of you probably know Greg. He's been writing for Linux Journal for years on topics such as server hardening and DDoS attacks and virtualization, too many more to count, actually. Greg is managing consultant with Accenture in the DevOps architecture practice, and he too has over 20 years of hard-fought, some may even say bloody experience in security and operations as a developer, network engineer, sysadmin, tech ops manager, VP of operations, and CISO. And I really can't think of two better people to be here talking about moving beyond Sudo, so let's talk about Sudo. Now, this is the time, if this were a TV show, the wavy lines would start on your screen as I take you back to 1980, which so happens to be the year I was married as well. It was also the year that Sudo was invented and introduced. It has certainly evolved a lot over the ensuing 37 years, but as Greg points out in the new Geek Guide, it has evolved by expediency, essentially solving one problem at a time in each iteration. So today, achieving least privilege principle with sudo commands authorized independently per host, per user, becomes unwieldy very, very, very quickly at scale. But hey, rather than listen to me quote Greg or read from the Geek Guide, I'll let Greg speak for himself. Greg?
Thanks, John. So my name is Greg Bledsoe, as you've been told, and I have made a pretty good career out of jumping on the right bandwagon at the right time. My first bandwagon was open source and Linux, and my second bandwagon was security, and my latest bandwagon is DevOps. And all of those things are culminating in this webinar and in this Geek Guide, and in the need to evolve our security practices and put them in a way that we can consume in the age of unprecedented change. So basically, if you read the Geek Guide, which I definitely recommend, there's a lot of good stuff in there, but you'll find that I take you through some use cases from simple to complex. I talk about the implications of differences. We talk about the historical context of Sudo, and whether or not you dive deep into Sudo, I always work from principles to strategy and from strategy to tactics. And then tactics give you techniques. Techniques then give you experience, which feed back into new principles that you can deduce. And this is basically the story of the evolution of Sudo, of IT in general, and essentially the world. So we are privileged and possibly cursed to live in the age of unprecedented change. The Chinese curse has definitely come true in our times, that may you live in interesting times is our life. We live in very interesting times indeed. We not only have unprecedented change to deal with, but we also have unprecedented empowerment and opportunity. So another Chinese proverb is also true in our times: in chaos is opportunity. So there's a big first mover advantage for people who come to understand the need to continually adapt, the need to continually unlearn and relearn, the need to continually update our practices and our processes and our people skills. Everything it needs to evolve with the times. This is particularly true of security. So just a little bit on this exponential change and why this is not going to stop anytime soon. Change actually started to accelerate exponentially. You can argue that change was fairly linear, but we hit the curve where we started to go exponential after World War II with lean manufacturing in Japan. They really increased their ability to produce change, to not just produce products at low cost and high quality, but to develop tools to make tools to enable change. These have been widely adopted in manufacturing at long last, and our ability to even change physical things is very quickly. Our ability to satisfy consumers with products at a speed and a quality that would be shocking 100 years ago is dwarfed by our ability to change software. Our ability to change the nature of the software we deliver is so much faster now. We don't manage servers so much anymore as we manage platforms. We're achieving operations as a service and on-demand operations. Our servers tend to be ephemeral. We don't really care. We don't name them. They're cattle, not pets. We give them numbers and not names because they don't matter anymore. We don't heal them. We replace them. And the reason for this is because we've learned that after lean thinking took hold, we put those principles into practice with Agile, which then we started learning how to pull value into the market steadily and learn continuously. We no longer pretend we can predict the future, so we're making decisions. We're constantly creating rapid feedback loops. So the love child of lean and Agile is DevOps, and DevOps is eating the software world, and software is eating the world. We're now well into the second generation of DevOps, and everyone knows that we need to do DevOps, and everyone knows that means ephemeral servers and ephemeral platforms. And we repeat this cycle continuously, where we continue to improve not only our current system, but our ability to evolve the system. So in the days of yore, back before software was changing exponentially quickly, we had lots of time to exhaustively secure and configure our servers and our systems. So we learned by taking one server and exhaustively configuring it, exhaustively managing privileges, exhaustively spending time on the keyboard and in a shell configuring things. And again, in the ebook, I take you through some examples of this. And this is a very manual process, very time-consuming, that we automate now. So the problem is that using Sudo's default configuration systems, we run into some roadblocks in complexity. In the age of liquid infrastructure, we do not have the ability to spend incredible amounts of time on one server. We must manage a platform, but we still have the need to secure things and to have audit trails and to allow privileged users to do particular things and not others. So the complexity is our enemy. And we quickly get into a level of complexity that becomes almost impossible to manage when we use our legacy ways of securing servers. And this is why security has to update with the times. We need to change our security practices into chunks that we can fit into our DevOps practice and into our automation, into our lean and agile infrastructures. So security is also more important than ever, and mistakes are more costly than ever. We see a lot of headlines around data breaches, so the importance of security is going up as the time that we have available to us to implement new tools, to implement security has gone down. Our need to centrally manage has only increased and will only continue to increase. So we have to find new tools and new paradigms. We can augment Sudo. We can find other tools to replace it. In some cases, we can. But we have to consider that in the age of DevOps, the need to SSH into a production system arguably constitutes a kind of failure of our management system. So if I'm having to log into a production server now and change something on it on the fly, there's something I didn't anticipate. And it's probably more effective for me to replace this server than to go in and configure it. To configure a server, to replace it, and then put that one into production and remove the other. We have a lot of tools to be able to do that kind of thing now. But the one thing that we're really missing is our comprehensive but centralized management system that allows us to do our same level of detailed security that we do with Sudo, the principles that we've evolved with Sudo, and put this into a way that helps us manage our complexity, the complexity of our configuration, so that it's maintainable. Because a general principle that you will always find to be true is that complexity is the enemy of stability, predictability, and maintainability. The more complex your configuration has to be, the less maintainable, the less predictable, and the less stable it becomes. We need some tools that will allow us to do that. Now I've personally custom built tools that let me massage Sudo kind of into this form, but you still run into those edge cases of unpredictability that are things you didn't anticipate, like the subtle differences between sudo-i and sudo-su. These things can bite you. You have environment variables that you either expect to be there or didn't know were there, which have huge security and functionality implications, which we go into in more detail in the ebook. But these issues of complexity are the ones that really confound our ability to implement agility. And so we're sponsored by BeyondTrust, who is offering us a tool that can help us with that in quite a profound way. And so I guess I'll hand it over now to Paul Harper, who's going to take us through a little bit about what BeyondTrust is offering us.
Okay, thanks, Greg. I'm not sure if it's you or John, but can one of you throw me presenter rights so I can control share my screen? Okay. Just 1 second. Get things going here. All right, so I got to be sharing my screen because I've got a short demo at the end of this as well. So okay, so you know, obviously the whole premise of this call today is to kind of raise awareness to the Geek Guide, which does a lot to talk about Sudo and the evolution of Sudo. And my role is really to kind of I guess in a more interactive way explain a little bit about what BeyondTrust can do around let's just say that part of your management. So not necessarily replacing Sudo, although we do offer that as an option, but really just to make you aware of a little bit more about what we do here at BeyondTrust and specifically what we can do to help in that privilege management space as it pertains to I guess all of your systems, including like Dev and DevOps and where we're going there, but just your Unix and Linux systems in general. So just real quick before I get into that, here at BeyondTrust, a big chunk of our business is working in the privileged, privileged account management space, privileged access management. I think for some people still call it privileged identity management. Whatever. It's really just privileges on a platform. And for us, that kind of falls into three distinct buckets. We've got our enterprise password security, so that's the everybody knows that changing your password on a regular basis and using strong passwords are an important thing to do. That's fine for accounts associated with heartbeats like humans, but for the privileged accounts that often actually shouldn't be associated with people, those passwords need to be managed. So we deal with all of that. We also deal with like the endpoints of privilege management on, let's just say endpoints, so really Windows and Mac. For anyone that's not sure, that's kind of like Sudo on those platforms. So we've got I guess a section that deals specifically with that. And what I'm focusing on today, or what we're going to be talking about primarily today, is that server privilege management, and again with a more specific focus on the Unix and Linux platform. So controlling and simplifying access and privilege management, how you deal with DevOps, that sort of stuff on those critical business systems. Obviously, all of that, we have the standard features like you'd expect from an enterprise software vendor. We'll discover your assets, accounts, deal with the vulnerabilities. You have to understand that in this day and age, no system, no matter what software you put in place, is immune from attack or having vulnerabilities. 0 days are out there. So, and even if they're not, patching is an ongoing nightmare for everyone. So. There's always the risk of a breach. So, checking for threats and vulnerabilities is a big part of what we do. Again, one of the big differentiators for us are these next two items. Good reporting, being able to help you connect systems together rather than just treating Sudo as like a standalone application. We're more about integrating with the business in a bigger way. And obviously, most importantly, when we're talking about privilege management, that's really about policy and action response. So that's kind of high level for enforcing a good, reliable policy, being able to take actions when people do certain things, as well as auditing and alerting, that sort of stuff. Okay, so is Sudo enough? Is maybe a question that some of you will be asking through this presentation, or maybe already have. I should probably start off by saying, when I talk about privileged account management on the Unix and Linux platforms, there isn't really a one-size-fits-all. So these are some general high-level things that I've heard back from my customers. So I'm not saying this is the law and this is how this is how it is. So you may agree or disagree with some or all of these, but it's what I hear over and over, and it's not an extensive list of the issues that people have with Sudo, but it's some things that you should maybe at least consider. So effectively, login. In fact, actually, all your audit data, aside from what you sent to syslog, which is probably going to go to a central server, but maybe not. Your logs, but particularly your policy, your sudoers file, they sit on the box where you're actually doing your privilege elevation. So a lot of people are very concerned about that, and rightly so. To say they're not tamper-proof, like any system, it's just harder to control stuff when it's sitting out there on the endpoints rather than in a central location. Obviously, with Sudo, no official support or QA. Again, I get that it's a widely used tool, so there's a lot of people out there, and there's a lot of feedback from the community. That can be good and bad as well, right? So we have an AD Bridge product which has an open source version. So I know all about dealing with the community. The problem can often be volume, and again, that problem of not every issue or not every configuration is going to be the same. So, trying to find the information you need when you have an issue, or you're trying to get some piece of configuration done, depending on your skill level, it's one of those ones where your mileage may vary. So, but again, just not having someone you can just pick up the phone and call when there's an issue or a question is very troubling to a lot of people. And this last one, the complexities of managing on multiple hosts. So here at BeyondTrust, and something I'm going to get into shortly, is part of our Power Broker suite, which includes a number of tools that help with privileged account management. One of them is Power Broker for Sudo, that really helps people solve this particular issue. And again, it's not that you can synchronize a Sudo file, or if you're really daring, try and do like LDAP integration. It's just the complexities of doing that and dealing with synchronization is difficult for a lot of people. And probably one of the big drivers that I just throw out there right now is, typically people don't just want a single Sudo file centralized. Sometimes they're going to have groups of hosts, and how they're going to manage separate policy files for those individual groups of hosts. So I'll talk a little bit about how we can help there in just a few minutes. So, again, our view of privilege management, or the best practices for privilege management, and again, with a focus on Power Broker for Unix and Linux, I'll kind of go through this slide kind of quickly because it's a little bit of a marketing special, but I think it is important to understand that it's not just a question of controlling, what commands a user can run, that least privilege control. So I guess we'll start at the top and work our way around. So auditing and governance, obviously auditing what people do, particularly with privileged accounts, very important. Going clockwise, fine-grained least privilege. Again, Sudo offers a degree of fine-grained least privilege. It's really, again, how you define fine-grained. So, obviously we take that to the next level, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, but that's, having control over, who can do what. Again, Sudo is very focused on an individual system. We like to look more at your network or your enterprise. So being able to do basically control systems that aren't the ones necessarily that you're logged on to. So remote system and application control. Dynamic access policy, could probably just focus on the word dynamic. It's too much to just hard code a policy. Again, you can think of that as a Sudo file and just be content, going in there having to make changes. That's one thing, but really you want your policy to be dynamic. Look up who is a valid user, a valid host, valid commands. Is this, are you allowed to be running a command with certain arguments? All of that sort of flow into your policy should be dynamic. So my other favorite term for that is a data-driven policy. So you make a policy that controls the standard least privilege controls, the who, what, where, and when, but the feed into that policy should absolutely be dynamic. You don't want to be hard coding that in a policy file, because you will very easily end up shooting yourself in the foot. And again, we'll probably touch on some of that here in a few more minutes. File and policy integrity monitoring, or FIM for people that just like a nice easy acronym. I've always said, it's no good controlling, what admin X can elevate if the things that you allow admin X to elevate become compromised. So you need to make sure that, when somebody's on a system, the malicious stuff isn't being put on there. You could maybe argue, that's part of, like vulnerability management, scanning for vulnerabilities, but, sometimes somebody installs a piece of software, they do an update, and they're trying to, not necessarily them, but wherever that the source is coming from, tries to sneak in some backdoor, or even just admins that you've maybe trusted a little bit too much, and they they start testing their luck or seeing what they can get away with. How much control do they really have? Going and creating users when they're not authorized to create a user. Downloading scripts and having those scripts do stuff that you would otherwise not want them to do. So that's where monitoring systems, a file system level are important, and then privilege for analytics. So analyzing all of that data and just seeing what's going on and looking for anomalies essentially. Okay, so digging into a little bit, and again, I'm not going to do a whole sales pitch on our Power Broker for Unix and Linux product, or even our Power Broker line of tools, but just to, again, share some of the things that I find people are asking for, the controls or the features that most desirable to them, I guess is probably the best way to put it. So our Power Broker for Unix and Linux product was designed to operate centrally, from the outset. unlike Sudo, like I say, which is a per host solution. And again, I'm not here to continually knock Sudo. I'm just talking about differences. So for us, our focus was always centralizing policies, centralizing your log data, centralizing those session recordings, more than just that, but having a searchable index, making that audit data accessible from a central location. Remote host control, again, being able to, from a single host, manipulate or manage privileges on those remote hosts. The Sudo as language has evolved. Greg touched on that. If you read the Geek Guide, you'll learn a lot more about the evolution of Sudo. But again, that's one of those things. I might use this phrase a few times. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So whereas some maybe junior admins may look at the Sudo as syntax or policy format and be overwhelmed with the complexities. Other people may look at it and be perfectly happy, and then other people, as we know from experience, will look at it and find it too restrictive. You can do a fair bit of cool stuff with Sudo, but there are limitations. So again, with the PowerBroker line of tools, our goal is to go much further in terms of the controls we put in place. And most importantly, for any type of security tool, or maybe any enterprise tool in general, you want it to be highly available and highly scalable. So for us, we work with customers that they have 50 Unix boxes, maybe even less. Let's say 20 Unix boxes. They just want an easier way to control it, and we have production deployments in excess of 200,000 servers. So it's nice that one solution does fit all sizes in terms of footprint. All right, so here's probably when we start talking about some of the value we bring on top of Sudo, this is definitely a key point. And again, I'm not gonna sit here and do a direct product comparison. It's really again to give you some things to think about. So one of the features that we have in our enterprise replacement for Sudo, so this would be PowerBroker for Unix and Linux, is something called Advanced Control and Audit. So effectively, what that allows you to do is manage stuff at the system level, not the command level. And again, my goal in this presentation isn't to start getting all overly technical, and I want to try and keep this as high level as possible. So it's nice and simple for everyone to, even people that aren't so familiar with Sudo and Unix systems to follow along. But effectively, what that means is for anybody that's ever issued a Sudo command or command using Sudo, you type Sudo space and then the command and all the command arguments. And what the software effectively does is analyze what you typed after the Sudo command. However, for anyone that's got any, I'd even say a small amount of Unix knowledge, what you type and what the system actually does doesn't necessarily have to be the same thing. For example, I could easily symlink the whoami command to say the shutdown command. And then it would look like from the command line, I'm issuing a command called whoami to show me the logged on user, but the effective system call would be shutdown. So the system will shut itself down. Now, there are ways to build a number of controls into your Sudo's policy to control all of that. And if you're really good at writing Sudo policy, you shouldn't fall victim to most of those shortcomings. Again, our goal is really to try and remove the need to even worry about that, or for people that, that whole you don't know what you don't know. So how do you know what to write if you don't know about all the possible workarounds or potential issues that you may run into when you write Sudo's policy? Our goal is to try and separate some of that or make it easier for you. So that's really one of the key aspects of advanced control and audit, is to give you greater control at the system level. So it's not just stopping people from doing crazy tricks like symlinks. This will actually do other things as well. It actually gives you control over the actual file system. So for example, you could give somebody a root level shell, as I see people do all the time. I think Greg even mentioned your sudo-i, sudo su. Our software also lets you switch into privileged shells, root being the most common. And again, I completely get why people want to do it, and there are some use cases where that's required. I just want to give somebody a full root shell, and I'm just gonna audit what they do. So typically, they're going to turn on session recording. basically put a video camera on the screen and say, I trust you as root, but I record everything you do. The problem there is, you can very quickly end up with a massive amount of session recorded data. So then it becomes a whole, proverbial needle in a haystack trying to identify when somebody's done something malicious. So one of the other big advantages with our advanced control and audit is you can do things like you could let somebody have a root level shell, but you can still control on top of the local file system permissions, files they can access, folders they can browse into. Like you could completely shut off /home, for example. So let somebody on as root, but don't let them go snooping around at users' personal files. You can let them, you could let root go and run a script which is owned by root, but stop them from changing that script. So you may have certain scripts that need to run on a daily or weekly basis. Let them go ahead and run that, but just don't let them change it or delete it, so they can't actually compromise that system. It's really good for when you got a rogue admin or an admin that's gone really bad, who tries to leave some time bombs in place. Effectively, if you remove the controls that they don't need access to, and again, there's probably no reason why, for the most part, they should be deleting a whole bunch of files. You can literally strip that from the root account for any of those privileged sessions. The last thing I will mention here, which again I think is another big shortfall of a Sudo type product. Again, I don't want to turn this into an attack on Sudo because we actually have our power broker for Sudo product. So, but one of the big limitations is somebody logs on and they run a script, sudo myscript.sh. All you'll see in your log is that somebody ran a script, and ultimately whatever that script's doing is completely hidden. So if you've allowed somebody the ability to upload files to a system, they can write their script somewhere out of view, upload it to the system, run it, and you'll never be any of the wiser as to what actually happened. Yeah, there might be some negative results of that at that moment in time, maybe a little bit after, maybe days after. I don't know how you ever, when you get into that forensic section, how you ever actually prove, that script was malicious. So again, one of the key features of the advanced control and audit is the ability to audit what's going on inside of a script. All right, and then I know I've already mentioned this, but I'll talk a little bit more about this one. File integrity monitoring, to me, goes hand in hand with any type of privilege management. Again, you're going to control, the who, what, where, and when. That what piece is, very important. When somebody wants to, elevate a command, or really just making sure that a system doesn't get compromised. That includes the product itself. So one of the nice things, with our file integrity monitoring, it's just included with our privileged account management solution, is you can actually make sure that our product doesn't actually get tampered with. Okay, so you can think of that as you want to make sure the Sudo binary itself doesn't get manipulated. Yes, you could use us to monitor the Sudo binary. We have our own equivalent of that called pbrun. You can check that as well as any of the other configuration files are actually going towards making our solution work. So again, I'm not going to dwell too long on file integrity monitoring, other than saying it is important. Just like with privilege management, again, one of the key things that you're going to have to think about is centralized management. It would be a nightmare to have to manage FIM policies on a per host basis. You can group them together so that you have groups of hosts sharing a single FIM policy. With us, it's built into our PAM solution, so there's not like a separate agent or anything else you've got to deploy. But regardless of whether you use BeyondTrust or not, I would still argue you want to make sure that the FIM is a very a highly important part of your overall security stance. Again, targeting certain files, folders, you're not going to do every file and every folder on a system, so being able to selectively target stuff that really shouldn't change, and then tracking target changes. The common things are going to be the name of the file changes, the location changes, file size changing, that could be greater or smaller, date and time changes, somebody manipulating the ownership, user ownership, group ownership, the hash, if you're hashing your files to make sure that nothing changes inside, outside of the size. Permissions shouldn't be changing on most files, certainly on a day-to-day basis. And then the last one's a little bit of a separate one, and that's policy violations. It's really good with your FIM product if you can just say, nothing should have, a permissions mask of 777. Scan your system to make sure that's not set anywhere, and report again centrally on that, so you can go and remediate any of those issues. All right, last thing on the I guess the feature side of things, and again I'll talk about this one kind of quickly. To me, it's again one of those big differentiators between a product like Sudo and commercial solutions. That is decent forensics tools. Forensics really equates to good reporting, good indexing, good searching, that sort of stuff. You want to be looking for things that are abnormal on the system. Set up reports that are delivered at the end of each day, or the end of each week, or the end of each month. Showing when users suddenly start behaving different to normal, or when you actually have to go and investigate what's happened on a system. Have a nice, clear, easy to report that you can just fire up on the fly to easily identify who's been doing what on that system. Those are the key things, which again obviously we do. So just talking a little bit about PowerBroker Unix for Linux, this will actually apply somewhat to our PowerBroker Sudo solution. Again, if you haven't picked up on the theme yet, the key thing for us is really centralization. So separating the client, which you can think of again if you're more of a Sudo person, as where you type the Sudo command. Again, for us that would be pbrun, or if you're using our PowerBroker for Sudo, it's still that machine. The difference is whether you type Sudo or pbrun when you're using the BeyondTrust solution, is that will actually send its request to a centralized policy server. That's where your request gets authorized. That's basically it checks the policy, and I'll talk. Well, we're going to do a demo after this slide, so I'll show you some of the various policy engines that we have that again really go about making a lot of this simple. The login of that, the event log, I kind of normally refer to that as a photograph, right? It's a moment in time of that who, what, where, and when. So this user ran this command on this host at this date and time, and any other important information about it, again, gets stored centrally on that, a centralized log server. And session recording, even if you have an interactive session going, record that information away from the host where potentially privileged activities are occurring. So there's no chance of the policy, the event log, or the recorded sessions, if you choose to do that, being compromised or tampered with. And then, of course, all of that information can flow out into our own reporting engine. We've got our Beyond Insight that does reporting and analytics, but that can really go out to other things as well, Splunk or ArcSight. There's a bunch of popular themes out there now where people are sending data, but that's effectively the workflow. Just so when we're looking at my screen here in a second, you'll have some sort of idea about what's going on under the covers. All right, so we've got a short product demonstration, and again, I'm not going to get overly technical. We're talking Sudo and Unix and Linux, which unfortunately does require some command line work, but let me just jump back over here to my management console. So I'm already logged on. I guess we'll log out and start from the beginning. So I'm just going to log on with my admin using into our console. So this is the PowerBroker Service Management Console. So basically, it allows the various PowerBroker solutions to plug into it under the covers for things like discovery, installation, upgrade, policy management, and that sort of stuff. And I'm not gonna do a deep dive into all of this. Basically, I've already gone through my discovery process, where you just basically provide some, a CEDAR address, an IP address range, or a list of hosts. It will go off, do its discovery. As part of the discovery, you can then profile those machines. My lab isn't that big; it's got like 8 or 9 machines in there. I've already gone through the profiling aspect. And obviously, I have my software deployed, so that's obviously what we're going to be looking at today. And I figured we would, again, because the Geek Guide document focuses a lot on Sudo, I thought I would start off by showing you where we can actually make your Sudo management a little bit easier. So in here, we'll actually see the hosts. I'm not showing all of the available columns just yet, but you can see these systems have been profiled. You can see the software that's installed, the version, that sort of stuff. If you have a machine like these are ready to go, they've actually passed all the checks. If I look at this system, it says it's not ready. I can always drill in, get information about the various power broker solutions, what's wrong with them, any warnings that we pick up, what's actually configured on that host. But again, our goal today isn't really to deal with software discovery and deployment and everything. Really just pointing out that we can actually do all of our power broker commands from here. So as far as getting our client installed, after doing discovery, you can install, upgrade, and install if you need to remove it, and deal with alias groups, which maybe everybody's going, what's a Sudo alias group? So I'm going to get into that here in just a second. But we'll, at least in the demonstration today, we're going to be focusing on these three servers. I've already got the Sudo stuff deployed. I'll actually just highlight them just so we can see what we're looking at. You'll see that this server 1 is actually acting as the policy server and log server, so that's where all my Sudo stuff, I would say, is basically controlled and managed. And then we've got two servers down here that are acting just as clients. You can see the version of the PowerBroker Sudo client that's installed on these machines. And what's going to be really relevant for today is, here it says the pbsudo alias is lab sudo. So effectively what I've done is group these three machines together and said they share a common sudo as configuration. Now also within my network, I've got, I'll highlight these just so we can see what we're looking at. A few other servers here, just so happens it's 3 again, but there's no reason why that couldn't be 10 or 50 or 1,000. These machines are grouped together with a different sudo as configuration, so pbsudo demo. Again, it's just a way in which we can actually group servers together, or they can have, there's nothing stopping me having each one of these servers. I could have 6 independent sudo files for each of these 6 servers, and I could manage them all centrally here as individual servers. I've not really met anyone that wants to do that, on a scale of more than a couple of servers, but you can group servers together and also have some that are managed individually. So what we're going to do is before we actually go and look at those systems, I'm going to go over to the policy configuration, and again, this is where I say that we try and do stuff to make life easier around managing policies, not just sudo policies, but the PowerBroker Unix and Linux policies, file integrity policies. So along the top here, I've got the various policy modes. We'll come back and we'll actually look at some of these policies here in just a second. We're going to start with sudo. So what I'm going to do is in here, these are my policy servers that can serve up sudo policies. I've got 4 of them in my lab. The one I was just talking about with lab sudo was this server 1. And I've done, we're going to focus on these ones because the names are nice and easy. I effectively just have one sudo as file in this configuration. So it's called lab sudo, and when I click on it, here's my sudo as file. You can see that one version 10, there's some previous versions sitting right here. And this one sudo as file is now shared automatically between those 3 servers that are in my lab. And if I just scroll down, we'll actually go and look for my user demo 1. So I'm actually already logged on to all 3 of those systems just to save some time. As user demo 1, I'm just going to point out that user demo 1 actually doesn't have any rights in this sudo file. We don't have to review the whole of it. It's pretty much a default sudo file. We're not going to do anything complicated as far as policy. This is more just to demonstrate centralized management. So we can see right here, demo 1 doesn't have any rights. So we just actually hop over to my terminals, and I've got those 3 servers: server 1, server 2, server 3. They're already logged on as user demo 1. So we would expect if I try to do a command with sudo, I'm not going to do anything difficult. Who am I? It's prompted for my password, so it validates me as a user. It's prompted me for my AD password just because we've got our AD Bridge product installed. Obviously, that was a local user. It would just be asking for their Unix password. And it's telling me here that demo 1 is not in the sudo's file. Kind of is, just commented out, but it's same effect. This user doesn't have any rights to do stuff using sudo. And we'll find that if we do this on all 3 of my servers, if I can type my password right 3 times in a row, and sure enough, he's saying he's not in the sudo's file on all 3 of those servers. So now what we're going to do is we'll hop back over to our console, and I'm going to make a change. I'm literally just going to uncomment that user. Now, if I want, before I actually save this, I can do a syntax check that tell me that I've not messed anything up in my sudoers file, and then I hit save, and now basically you can see that version has gone up to version 11. I can do change control messages if I want to. I can just have it default with a date and timestamp. One of the nice things is when I've made changes, I can actually do a differential view as well. Again, I'm not going to go through all of the various capabilities that we have in here, but let me just scroll down. I'll actually highlight in a true diff fashion anything that's changed, been added, deleted, and as I scroll up and down, obviously I've just made one very simple change, which was uncommon user demo 1. He's now allowed to run basically anything on any system without getting prompted for a password, because that would just be more typing for me in this demo. So I've made the change. That happened centrally, and when I go back, the sync time, basically these servers will actually cache the sudoers policy in memory. I'm going to show you that there is no sudoers file in a second. As normally, within a few seconds, depending on your network. If you allow a minute, then that's probably overkill. Unless you're just going to press the up key, run the same command. Obviously now I don't get prompted for the password, and it works. And again, I can just pop through server after server, and it works. So basically, I made that single update on a nice, easy to use web GUI, and suddenly I'm able to run these commands where I wasn't able to before. And just to work backwards through these servers, if I was to try and look at my Etsy sudoers, I actually don't have a sudoers file. I can tell you it's the default sudoers configuration. I didn't just point it to a different location. There literally is no need to have a sudoers file here. Even if I was to create one, or if I was somehow able to compromise the sudoers file on this box, which is something I've seen a lot of our customers want to do, leave it in place so that people, almost like a honeypot, right? They try and get tricky rights on, or rights they shouldn't have on this system by manipulating the sudoers file. Even if they do, it won't have any effect. We just don't use it. So really nice that you got that centralized management, very easy to control essentially a sudoers file effectively. So that's the sudo stuff. Let's hop back to something less command line-ish, and we'll just look at some of the other policy controls that we've got. So if I go back to policy management, that wasn't letting me click on anything. So just to show some of the other types of policies we have, if I was to go into like role-based policies, I can use that same server to control, actually no I can't because it's not enabled on that one. Let's do this one where it is. Role-based policies, very simple. It just gives you a graphical way of doing who, what, where, and when. So you don't have to worry about that funky syntax that we just looked at in the sudoers file. In here, it's very simple where I can just say, who's allowed to submit a command. It can be, because I'm using my AD bridge, it could be domain users, it could be everyone, it could be an individual user. Any way you want to group them. We support both AD groups as well as local groups, AD users, local users. Who's the command going to run as? You can let people elevate to an individual user. You can also let them pick a user at runtime by specifying a group. What, again, just a list of commands. I won't go through all of these, but you build up groups of commands, and then you can assign them to hosts. Where can I issue a command from? A submit host. Where are they allowed to run? Where can actually run the command, or host, or particular host. And then when, obviously, anytime, business hours, working day, that sort of stuff. So it makes it very easy. You can still actually, you can see here I've got scripts enabled, so you can actually still do additional scripting stuff, printing messages to screen, that sort of thing. And we can very easily say, hey, this is going to be an accept rule, this is going to be a reject rule. Do I want to record the data? Yes, no. If you're going to record it, where do you want to record it? So again, we just make it really simple to build up those policies which cover I would say a good 95% of most use cases. Like I say, the who, what, where, and when. Do I want to audit this data? Do I want to allow it or reject it? Very, very straightforward. Now, obviously, we've looked at Sudo, where, again, most people on this call should understand the sudoers policy language. And then this is probably going to the other end of the spectrum, where it's a very simple graphical way of managing policies. We've not really talked too much about PowerBroker Unix for Linux. This I know I have got configured on my server 1, same as my sudoers policy. Here I've got a bunch of policy files for us rather than calling them sudoers. Our default policy file is pv.conf. And this is basically our version of the Sudo as policy language, only a lot more powerful. I'm not going to walk anyone through all the stuff that I've done in my policy language, but in here, things like, if I want to block somebody from running reboot, no matter where the reboot binary is, I can say block someone from doing an execute on that reboot binary. Now you might look at that and say, okay, well, you were telling me you're all about simplifying things. How is this any simpler than doing Sudo policy? Well, one of the things we can do is we can say, I want to build an ACA rule, and then in here I can come through and say things like, what's going to be our target? Let's just say /etc/password. This is going to be a binary or whatever. You can see it's already started building my ACA rule at the top, but I could say I don't allow all operations. I want to allow a read, but I want to block a write. So don't let anybody update the password file. Probably wouldn't be a smart thing to do. Maybe we should let people update it so they can, add users or remove users, but we don't want to allow them to delete it. Should never be able to delete the password file because that really would be bad. There is no reason to block executables or the execution of the password file, but we have those sort of controls. We can log individually different log levels on when people try and do certain things. But anyway, here's all the, we'll just pick a bunch of these. There we go. So what happens is, as we're actually choosing what we want someone to do, actually builds the syntax for us. This is a, I think, way overcomplicated ACA example, but we go ahead and do insert, and then it just drops it right here into our policy. In any case, I'm not actually going to update my policy with random stuff like that. That would be bad. I'll just discard those changes. All the same stuff, we get version control in here. We got, when I make changes, if I want to, I can, add additional change management messages. I got the whole differential stuff, full nice editor here. But that's our vision of our version of Sudo, if you like, or our Sudo replacement. Just real quick, while we're here in the GUI, and I'll spend a couple of minutes showing you what the PowerBroker Phoenix Linux Sudo replacement looks like on the command line level. But before we get there, I'll just show you what we can do with file integrity monitoring. And again, file integrity monitoring, I've got my same servers, which is pick on our server one like we have been, and I will do fin policy 1. So these are different policies, and I can assign these policies to individual servers or groups of servers. That can all be done here through the GUI. And just to show you some of the controls that we put in place. So let's just look at this one for the policy definition for log files. We're going to target everything, but we could target just directories, devices, bullet links, that sort of stuff, or just files, whatever you want. It's just a nice generic one. I'll expand this and say, I can say, hey, I want to track stuff to do with the file and folder name and location. So what happens is the file is moved or renamed within the current file system, or if the file is moved to a different file system. Those are things I want to track. I don't really care so much about folders, so I'll ignore that. What happens if the file hash is changed? I can choose not to hash or to only hash files smaller than a certain size, because obviously hashing is an expensive operation, particularly when you get to big files. What happens if the file and folder size changes? If I'm only interested in if the file or folder size decreases, so people are deleting stuff. And again, I won't read out all of these. They're pretty self-explanatory. UID changes, GID changes. What happens if the date and time changes on the file? Basically, you set up your policy, and then at the end, you basically just say, here's my policy. Here's what I want to monitor. In this case, a directory called /monitor. So basically, everything in the monitor folder. I'm not doing the monitor folder itself. If I wanted to do that, I would literally just get rid of the asterisk. And what policy definition do I want to apply to this path? In this case, I'm doing bin, but I could say log because we were just doing that. Do I also want to monitor subfolders? Do I want to follow some bullet links? And do I want to follow off the device? If I want to add an additional path, let's say we wanted to do /etc/password, as we've been doing that. I choose my definition, say bin. I don't care about subfolders and everything else. I'm doing a specific file at this point. And these are the things that are going to get monitored. If you wanted to do your entire system, not something I would probably recommend, but you could do that. And if you want to explicitly exclude stuff, again, I can specify certain things that I never want to monitor. So, just so you don't end up with a lot of bloated data. That's how
we do have a ton of questions to get to too. So,
Just one more thing left to show.
Sure, go ahead.
It's going to be real quick. So this is all of the policy stuff done here in the GUI, and the last thing I wanted to show you, just so people can kind of visualize a little bit, I'm going to hop over to server 2, not for any particular reason. I'm logged on as a user called demo1. To elevate with our software, I do pbrun who am I, and this will, I'm a little bit verbose with what I do, but I point out some information that it was actually accepted by a separate server, so it went off to server 1 for its authorization, tells me that the command's going to execute as root, and does that. And just to show, I could probably do 100 different examples here, but one or two things very quickly. If I was to do something like pbrun ticket, here we'll basically say, hey, you need a ticket number from ServiceNow in order to you know, get an elevated shell, whatever command is you want to do in there. So this just kind of like shows you the flexibility of things we can do. I could do like SQL, for example. This will actually go off and basically retrieve a password, get me logged into Oracle. It's warning me that my password's going to expire in 7 days with this account, but it logs me on, and now I'm basically doing stuff in Oracle. And if I try and drop a table, it'll intercept that and kick me off. So, like I say, 101 different examples there. But as we have a lineup of questions, I will stop talking and turn it over to John, I guess, for the questions.
Right. Okay, we have several that have been submitted. Let's start from the earliest. How does this meet audit compliance like PCI or SOX? And why don't I ask? I'll ask 4 questions at a time. How does this meet audit compliance like PCI or SOX? Does Power Broker comply with NSA requirements? Does this interact with or replace SE Linux extensions? And what attributes of a system are available for use in node classification? Is it limited to what was on the screen?
Oh, okay. That's four big questions. I'll work my way backwards and probably forget question 1 by the time I get there. So what's available for use in the policy? Really anything that you can reference from the command line. Again, this wasn't supposed to be an in-depth demo. I would probably say, I think actually it's one of the poll questions, is if you would like a deep dive demo, I would highly recommend that. With every event, every time I type pbrun command, we log about 175, maybe more, different attributes. All of those are available in the policy. You can also define your own. Really, any piece of variable information you can get at from the command line, and it doesn't have to be restricted to that host. Like I say, you could query an LDAP server, pull back a whole bunch of data, and then use that in your policy, or do a database lookup. All of that can be used within your policy, and you can choose to add as much or as little of that to the event loggers as well. So really very extensive in terms of the attributes you can use. Far in excess of Sudo, and it's actually one of the features that a lot of Sudo converts really like. Can't remember what question number 3 was.
Interaction with or replacement of SE Linux extensions.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I don't know why I asked about that one. Okay. So I would kind of say that you kind of make SE Linux redundant for the interactive shells. I would say that SE Linux still has a place on a system when you're doing this. Obviously, our goal is to simplify configuration of policy for what users can do. SE Linux is good for like those back-end processes. I see so many people just disable SE Linux or make very basic rules because it's hard to configure. So you can absolutely run SE Linux alongside Power Broker for Unix and Linux, but you end up kind of like duplicating a lot of the rules, right? So you say, hey, I want somebody to be able to run the who am I command. You then have to go and add an SE Linux rule to say, hey, I want somebody to be able to run the who am I command. So you duplicate your efforts in a large way, but we can run in, I'm really bad with SE Linux, is it unconfined mode? It's normally how we recommend it. So basically, SE Linux basically says Power Broker Unix Linux can do whatever it needs to, and I won't interfere with it, and that's really the best way to go. I think the next one was PCI compliance.
NSA requirements. Does it straight yes or no, I guess. Does it comply with NSA requirements?
Yeah, so we've got a big footprint in the federal market. That would probably be a much longer conversation to have offline about how we help with all of those requirements. We've got some documents that really help what products match to what regulatory compliance requirements or government requirements, but we can, like I say, ask for a follow-up and somebody will help you through all of that.
Great. And then does it meet? How does this meet audit compliance like PCI or SOX?
Yeah, kind of the same thing. Compliance is it's a big minefield, and often it's open to interpretation. We definitely do a lot of stuff to help with auditing, control and audit, the whole centralization or consolidation of accounts, centralization of policy, policy reporting, being able to audit and do that forensic stuff. All of those are requirements that fit into, definitely PCI and SOX are probably the two big ones, but or HIPAA, I guess, is the other one. Obviously, we don't solve every requirement for all regulatory compliances, but we map a lot of the requirements that people have to really help people meet compliance when they need to.
Great. We have other questions we could ask, but I think we're about out of time here. Great job filling everything up. Let's see. Do you want one more question?
Sure.
How about?
I'm sorry, and I was going to just say, and then for anyone that didn't get a question answered, just ask for a follow-up in the poll, and someone like a no pressure contact, we can go into questions, right? Right,
exactly. Download the ebook, read about it, and then contact us, and we can answer any questions you might have. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for staying and listening. I think we gave a lot of information, and I really appreciate everybody's participation. Paul and Greg, thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much, Tom.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.